Hi everyone, welcome to lecture 4. So this lecture is all about moderation, which is a subject very close to my heart because it's how we ensure that we are accurately assessing and comparing the academic achievements of different children. Then we're going to look at a little bit about how we record and we report, particularly in relationship to things that we might have moderated. So let's look at what is moderation. So moderation is about consistency. It's making sure that whatever we assess and we report on is consistent regardless of who it is. So we're not wanting to have a halo effect with different children because we like them that we give them a better mark or anything like that. We want to be very objective. When we've talked in previous weeks about observations, objectivity is the most important thing, and moderation is a form of allowing us to be objective about things. It's about making sure that we answer this crucial question. How do I know my understanding of achieving the standard is the same as the pre-primary teachers at another school? That's at the core of moderation. It's making sure, because we have to report in an A to E grade or in a 1 to 5 grade or in some 5-point scale every 6 months to parents, we have to make sure that we are being consistent between our classes at the school of the children achieving the same levels and between different schools. It's making sure that we don't adjust our results and go, oh, so-and-so's just having a bad time. Yes, that's the story behind the data, but what the actual data shows us is this level of achievement. We need to be careful about the level of achievement versus the story behind the data. So let's have a look at some content. So this is taken directly from the judging standards within our SCASA documentation. So the topic was number and algebra, connecting the number names, numerals and quantities, including 0, initially up to 10 and beyond. So this is using a placemat activity. The students were required to write the number in the middle, tell me the number name, draw or make it, and show another way of representing that. So when you have a look at that, you kind of go, well, actually, they can do that fairly well. So if we look at the annotations related to it, they connect the number names, numerals and quantities up to 10. So the annotation in orange says, yes, they provided different ways to represent the number correctly using words and diagrams, writes a number 10, right, and draws the number 10, and so on. So pre-primary satisfactory achievement work sample. So pretty much that's a C. So that tells us that they have done exactly what we require in that content. Now let's have a look at what excellent achievement would be. So if we made this an open-ended task, and instead of saying, can you do 10, we said, can you choose a number that you like? And it could be a number 10, it could be a number higher than 10, it could be a number lower than 10. What would excellent achievement look like? So this child has chosen the number 16. They have written it beautifully. In the middle, they have not reversed any of their numbers. They have drawn it perfectly. They've shown 4 different ways, including two quite complex ways, the second ones with a 10 plus 3 plus 3 and a 10 plus 5 plus 1. That shows an unbelievable understanding of the number 16. So if we think about that, it's showing it at very high achievement. So what would below standard look like? And in pre-primary, you would definitely have certain students who would not be able to do any of those things. So that's your below achievement. So let's have a look at English now. So in our pre-primary English achievement standard, what we have is the next task that I'm going to show you relates to this writing and creating, where we want them to use familiar words and phrases and images to convey their ideas. We want them to show evidence of sound and letter knowledge, beginning writing behaviours, and experimentation with capital letters and full stops. They correctly form upper and lowercase letters. So that's our achievement standard for the end of pre-primary. I wouldn't expect my pre-primaries in term 1 to be able to do that. However, this is presenting our C level achievement for the end of pre-primary. When you do your midterm report, your mid-year reports at the end of term 2, it would show variations on that. with them working towards that end of year standard. So let's have a look at what that could look like as a task. So their description of their everyday task is that photographs were taken of the children carrying out different things in the classroom, and then we wanted them to do some writing. So they shared with a partner what they were doing in the photograph, and they were then asked to use their sound letter knowledge to write 1 or 2 sentences that described what was going to happen in the photograph. These are so cute. So if we have a look, we've got a beautifully constructed drawing in some way. We have the words that are phonetically spelt, but actually clearly understandable. On the bottom left, you can see the annotation that says, I like the home corner, I like the books, I like painting, I like blocks. So if we have a look at our task was to have a photograph of things that are around the room and for them to be able to explain it in some way. Beautifully done. Write short, simple sentences to convey ideas, events, or information. I like the home corner. So they've done that. Writes familiar words and phrases related to personal experience or a specific topic. They spelt the words phonetically, representing initial and key sounds. Writes from the top to bottom and left to right and leaving space between the words. So if we have a look at that, I would see that was for pre-primary. If it was the end of pre-primary, I would say that that would be satisfactory to high achievement. I would be quite happy with that if that's what they were able to do by the end of pre-primary. If they were doing that in the middle of pre-primary, I would be ecstatic, because that means for me they're actually on a trajectory over the next 6 months to do even more. So they would be heading towards high achievement. It's important we understand, particularly in kindy and pre-primary, that kindy doesn't have our achievement standards. Pre-primary does have our achievement standards and our judging standards, but they are for the end of the year. The children are working towards those. When they're tracking really, really well, they could get an A in the middle of the year and then get a B at the end of the year because they've not made continuous growth. So we need to be very clear about how and why we are assessing and grading, and that's why moderation is so important. So when we're looking at our documentation, what we want to consider is all of these things. So we've talked about this previously with our observations as well. So what is the purpose of our documentation? So why are we collecting those work samples? So I had a number of things when I had year ones. I would collect writing samples twice a term, at the beginning and end of every term, regardless. I would always have writing samples collected in physical forms and then moving into digital forms as well. I would also do oral reading work samples, and I would do those 3 to 4 times a term. So that way I had every few weeks I could hear their reading, and I would also write down the behaviors I observed. So were they using their finger to motion underneath it? Did they pause on lots of words? Were they getting the same words mixed up? I would write down the behaviors. So that way I had an ongoing record when it came time to reporting, or more importantly, when it came time to have a meeting with parents, I had all of my documentation ready. So I have to think, who will see my documentation? If it's just for me, I can write what I wish. However, any documentation about student results, potentially it needs to be seen by a number of other people. It might be that the principal or the deputy or the assistant principal needs to say, right, mum wants to come in and have a meeting, primary caregivers are coming in, we need to go through what's happening in class. Can you show me your records? So you want to make sure that you have records in a format that are suitable for others to view as well. So even when I know I'm pretty sure it's going to be for me, I always make it in a format and language that is appropriate for anyone else to see. A lot of schools use digital record keeping in some form, so they might have OneNotes that are shared between all the year ones. They might have sector notifications where things get added into sector or connect in the government system. So you have to think who will see it and therefore change your language and match it appropriately. Record keeping matches in with that, doesn't it? So think, am I going to be adding it into a digital record for ongoing records that we can see year after year? A lot of teachers are reluctant to do that, but as somebody who's often encountered children with special needs in their classes, if I knew that all of that had happened before, it makes life so much easier. A lot of schools have clear guidelines of what you must include that carries on with the child through their records. And that's part of what schools will give you, the details that you should include. Now, you've got observations and you have work samples. You then need to ensure that you have an analysis of it. And that's the story behind the data. So I can collect a piece of work and it can look atrocious, but the story behind the data is that the child had a really, really sore arm, they were having difficulties writing during that task, and they didn't give me their best work. Or conversely, that the educational assistant had sat with them and helped them to scribe it all, so then it was fantastic and well beyond what they had demonstrated previously. So you have to give the story behind the data to make sure that you have all of the evidence for somebody else reading it. Now, your writing style should be always professional. You can't write that they really stuffed it up. You can write they had difficulties completing the task, but you need to make sure it is in a language style that is suitable, because again, you don't know who's going to see it, you don't know how many years ahead it will be, and so on. So you want to make sure that you're not putting yourself into any positions of difficulty that you have to explain out later. So organising your assessments, think about all of your physical ways of doing your assessments, and then you've also got all the digital ways. A lot of schools still use a lot of paper-based things, but I'm finding the transition into digital is happening more and more in our schools. So I used to have a folder. I would have a file divider for every single child that was in my class, and I would put in work samples and things like that. I would then also have my master checklist that would be organised by learning area or by domain when I was working in the kindies. So that way I had everything ready and at hand. Now as I move into a more digital format, I use my OneNote. I have a section for every single student. What makes OneNote even better for me is that I can put in my audio recording. So with one button, I can push it and I can organize all my assessments. So I just record, I have in there work samples, I can put in my photos, I can add in my audio, I can add in my notes in a different color, and I can share it as well. I can copy and paste and pop things into other formats that are needed for the school. So as I said, you check out what your school requires you to do, and then you organise your assessments accordingly. When you're on prac, make sure you ask your teachers how are they organising theirs, and ask, can I have a look at it? You don't need to keep a copy of it or anything like that, but just make sure that you see what different people are doing. The more ideas that you can get, the easier it will be when you go out and you have your own classroom. And even when you're in your third and fourth pracs, making sure that you understand how you can record your assessments, because keeping on top of it, it's a bit tricky. So these are some sample ones that we have available for you as part of Notre Dame documentation. So you might want to have something like a background profile. So you might want to put in a little bit about the child. My thing is that the more you understand the child's story, the more you understand the child and their behaviours in the classroom. So understanding and finding out this information, yes, it might be available in all of your school documentation. Transcribe it and make it for each child so you have it at your fingertips. There's no use assuming a child has major issues with language development and then you go and find out that they don't speak English at home at all, that they're speaking Korean at home. Well, of course they're going to have some issues at school then. So we need to be cognizant of any of the issues that are going to affect their development at school. Now, allergies and medical information, vitally important. And some summary like this, fantastic for you at the beginning of the year. I find a lot of teachers have them and they put little photos on as well. So one of the first things they do is make this up even before they start. You find out information from previous teachers and the school documentation. You then add in over the first week that you have the children more of this information, and then pop a little photo as well. So think about something like this for every child when you start your prac next year, to go through and go, okay, what's their name, their date of birth, their siblings, their family structure, any custody or issues that you need to be aware of, their heritage, their first home language, those things, such rich set of data for you. And if you took the time to do that for each child, it will give you that analysis to understand the children even more during your first few weeks with them. So a background profile, very useful. Then think about your observations. So we've looked at observations when we did our video analysis. So think, okay, so how am I going to observe them? Why am I going to observe them? What am I going to observe? So then how do I record that? It could be as simple as this. What's the date and the time? So remember, these are your time-stamped ones. What is your focus area? Are you looking at their gross motor development? Are you looking at their climbing? Are you looking at their play interactions with others? Then write down your clear observations in objective language, and then provide an analysis or interpretation. That's the story behind the data. Then a plan for your future learning experiences. What you going to do with that data? How are you going to make sure that it makes sense and that you are then doing something with it and it's not just a wasted experience for you? And again, when you're on prac, do this for your focus children that you have. You have to pick 3 focus children. You have a focus children observation sheet that is through Sonia, but add something like this in as well. So you've got your individual one from previous and you have another individual assessment. This is all the richness of the data that you can continue to add in at different points in time. So then this becomes a learner profile. So this is where you would take your individual information that you know, and then over a series of observations, you would be able to say, what are the areas of strength of that particular child? How are you going to plan for extension experiences to capitalize on those strengths? Think about what are the areas that require a little bit more assistance in some way. How are you going to ensure you plan to make sure that they are supported with all of those learning experiences? Because we want to make sure that we are providing the maximum learning opportunities for every child within our class. So think, how will you do that in the easiest and best way possible? Again, pick your 3 focus kids that you have to choose each prac and write down something like this. Again, think of the richness of the data that you're having. So now this moves into more of a group profile. So you might have some reason for looking at what they're doing, and this again could be a great thing to do in your first couple of weeks of prac. So your focus area could be your math sessions. How does it link to your domains and your learning area activities that you are witnessing? What are you observing? So are the children sitting really well? Do you notice that they love when they do the music? What else are you noticing with any of those? So pick one or more of those areas and write down some observations about it. And then write down what is your planning that's coming out of it. So if you know that the children love music and you really notice that they come to life when the YouTube videos go on with the Go Noodle or whatever those are, plan to put those into your lessons or your transitions in some way. Have a look at how the teacher does the transitions. Does she use songs? Does she have a particular rhyme that she uses? Is there a whole lot of non-verbals? Is there a chime that she uses for different things? How are the learning centres set up? What works really well? What's creating problems in some way? And your outdoor areas, how are they organised? Do you just let the children go wild? Is there a process? Is there particular clear learning intentions for some of the activities that are set up outside? So do your observations at individual level and for the class, and they will all add into your experiences and your lesson planning when you're on prac, and definitely add in when you're a teacher. So now let's have a think about reporting. So we've moderated our activities. We've then recorded and thought about what we do with all our records. So let's have a think about how we're going to report. So when we report, it is an obligation that we have formal reporting twice a year from pre-primary onwards in our primary and all the way through to the end of schooling. Kindy doesn't have these formal requirements for reporting. However, many schools do use some type of formal report. There's various ones that are available. There's a number that are a couple of them, I think, that are available through the Education Department website. And then Catholic Ed has provided a couple of different formats that schools can use as well. So you have your formal reporting periods, but then you might have some informal time. So there might be set meetings that are parent meetings. You might use apps like Seesaw they're a form of reporting to parents and ongoing ways for the parents to be able to see what's going on. So think, are you doing formal or informal reports? Then decide how you will report. So you know what you have to do for your formal reports. They're already preset by the school. But how else are you going to keep parents in the loop about their child's progress? Decide on a process that you can then use. And when you're on prac, negotiate that with your teacher and think, right, how will I ensure that the parents are receiving feedback about their student progress? And sometimes you'll be able to do it directly, but most of the time when you're on prac, you can't. But when you're in the classroom, that's when you need to decide how are you going to keep parents in the loop. And you make sure that this always fits with school policy. So before any reporting period, you have to make sure that you are informed and prepared. Now, I know that sounds really, really obvious, but make sure that you are not getting to week 6 of term 2 and then doing a whole lot of tests with kids. So it should be that you have ongoing records. So when it comes to reporting, you can actually pull up all your information. You flick through your OneNote, you flick through your pieces of paper, you make sure your work samples all align, and that leads to you being able to make an informed decision with a grade attached to it. There's no getting around the grades. You have to provide a 5-point grading scale, so you need to know what is a C. You need to know what is the satisfactory achievement for that student at that age. And that's something that you often decide as a school. Now, a lot of schools before reporting periods, they ensure that they have a clear action plan for any students who are not achieving well. So, for example, one of my friends, she's a principal, they have a rule, and it's a very hard and fast rule, that if a parent is going to see a D, let alone an E, on a student report, then they must have a meeting before the report goes home. Not the day before, but a few weeks before. So you should know pretty much at the beginning of term 2 if a child is not achieving as you anticipate. Now, most people, if you are working with the children, you wouldn't want to wait until week 3 of term 2 to have a meeting with the parent that their child is not achieving well. If it is something that is observed in the first few weeks, have a meeting in week 4 or 5 of term 1 and say, right, I've got a few concerns. We've started some different activities. I'm noticing that your child is not achieving as we hoped. Is there anything that we need to know? And it might be that they've changed medication, they've just started this, they've had a new baby. Work out what is the information that you need to make good decisions about things. Parents hate it when they are told 2 days before reports are due that their child is getting a D and they had no idea. And sometimes, say when it comes to year 2 to year 3, there's quite a transition between year 2 and year 3, and sometimes the children don't make that transition very well. So they struggle a little with the upped expectations. So helping the parents to understand what's going on is really important for your peace of mind and for the relationship that you have with the caregivers. So make sure that you are ready for anything. Make sure you have enough data and that you have spoken with other people in your school who need to know. It could be your line manager, it could be your assistant principal, your deputy, the head of reporting at the school, whatever is the person that you need to speak to, that's who you need to go to. Most schools will clearly outline this for you during term 1. So what are our ways of reporting? We've got, yes, our formal reports. Other things that you will see schools use a lot is parent interviews. There's 3-way conferences that involve the children as well. And these were used a lot And then I found they kind of fell out of favour, and now they've come back in again, particularly with remote learning. A lot of people use Zoom to do the three-way conferences. I use work samples all the time. They are my most important thing that I have, and I collect work samples, and I don't keep them as a pile of work samples that are by class. I sort the work samples by child. So I show the progress of the child, not just the work samples by the class. Most of the schools that I've worked at, we had learning journeys, and the learning journeys, one of the schools I worked at, we had 2 learning journeys a year. So at the end of term 1 was a learning journey. At the end of term 2, actually no, we had 1 learning journey. We had, at the end of term 1 was parent reports, parent meetings. At the end of term 2 was reports that went home formally. At the end of term 3 was our learning journey open night. At the end of term 4, reports went home again. So different schools do it in different ways, but think you don't even have to follow the school. If the school's not doing it, you can do it. If you've had a special activity that's gone on, and sometimes I would do that, we would have popcorn night to show the movies that we'd made for something. And so we would just invite the children and their parents, and we would say, we'll put on some popcorn, and we would hire a popcorn machine, and we would set up some chairs in the undercovered area, and we would play their movies, and we would treat it as though it was just a nice movie night. So we put all the movies together, and we had a great way of doing it. And then you've also got your ways of reporting. Most schools will have a diary of some sort that will go backwards and forwards between home and school. Some children that's in a digital form, and some it's in a written form. A lot of schools still have it in a written form. So you can quickly jot down a little note saying, Johnny's had a really bad day today. Sometimes you'll be able to use sector notes and things like that as well. So work out a way of reporting to parents in some way. And of course, you've also got test results. And again, some schools have test books and test files. Not so keen on that in early childhood, but if it's school policy, then sometimes you can't argue with it. And some schools use Seesaw as their way of doing that as well. So the children take screenshots or photos of their physical tests that they've done, and they go home to the parents via Seesaw. We want to make sure whenever we are assessing that it is holistic. So we don't want to just have assessment that looks at one aspect of a child development. We want to provide that whole picture of the child. We want to make sure that we have the story behind the assessments and the data. So make sure that it is encompassing all the things that are going on with the child. Think about, is your assessment reliable? So where possible, you want to make sure that you are following all of your clear assessment principles in some way. And most important, how can you be sure your assessment isn't just a bad day? And that's where we want to make sure that we have more than one assessment over a period of time, making sure it's showing consistency and so on. And we want to make sure that whatever we do reflects their journey, not just points in time. We want to show growth. We don't just want to say whether they could or couldn't do that. We want to show, well, they couldn't do it, but now they can. And they're doing most of it, but they've still got this bit. Oh my goodness, now a month later, yes, that's what they're able to do. So we want to show that journey that students take. Now, conversely to that, however, we have another type of reporting that you will encounter, and that is there is reporting which is public. So all schools, by government decree, must include data that goes up onto the My School website. And the My School website is such a great set of data for you when you're making choices about where to go on prac. So you can go in and you can have a little look, and you can see the absentee rates of the children. You can see the proportion of Indigenous students that you have in the school. You can see the number of teachers to the number of students. You can see the funding that they might receive. You've got all of this extra data that's available through the My School website. Obviously, there's also all the NAPLAN data in there as well, but there's actually quite a huge amount of data that is really useful for you as a prac student, before you go out on to the school, or even before you make your choice about which school to go to. So have a good look at it. Sometimes it's worth driving a little bit more to get a school that fits your needs a little bit. And having a look at the My School website gives you quite a bit of data. So if we have a think, our main parts that we went through today, we're looking at how we ensure that we provide good moderation, how we report and the different modes of reporting that we can use, and then what we can also look at to make sure that we are doing holistic assessment. In our tutorial this coming week, we've got marking and moderation tasks. We're using some of the tasks from the judging standards. We're looking at report writing, our assessment principles and scenarios, and we're going to do a little bit of work on our assignment preparation. Now, in order to prepare, it would be fabulous if you could make sure that you can access the SCASA extranet. So I'll send an email about that because it needs to be a real person who checks and signs off on that. So thank you all very much, and I will see you all in class. Hope you have a fabulous rest of the week.